Good morning. It's good to see you today. Hope you're doing well. Pardon me for getting this video out a little bit later than usual. Come on with us to the book of Matthew. And Matthew chapter 12 is where we're going to be looking. We're going to be looking at the account of the unclean spirit that returns. Let's come over there and let's read a little bit together, and then we'll just make a few simple points. Matthew chapter 12, verse 43. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So it shall be, so shall it also be with this wicked generation. It's an interesting account, and it shows a few basic ideas. And let's just consider a few of them. One of them, I want you to think about, what is the unclean spirit looking for? And to look back at the account, I'd like for us to just consider, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest, and he finds none. Even the unclean spirits are looking for rest. They don't find any. Why is that? It's because they're not looking in the right place. They're going through all the dry places, seeking rest, and they find none. We're mindful of what Jesus says. Those who are weary, those who are heavy laden, come to him, take his yoke upon, right? We take his yoke upon us, we learn from him. We will find rest for our souls. The demons, think about when the demons, the legion, that account where you have all those demons going into the swine, and they beg the Lord to not send them into the abyss. The demons, the unclean spirits, here in the account it says this one, he was looking for rest, but he didn't find any. Well, what are you looking for? And are you looking for it in the right place as well? You might also think about the account. Do you think that the unclean spirit tidied up? Look back in the passage again. He says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. You know, sometimes we'll go on a trip. We'll go on a trip for a week or two or whatever it is, and we come back, and we expect to find the house the way we left it. If we left it clean and tidy, we expect to find it clean and tidy. If we left it a mess, we expect to find it a mess. Well, you can tell the unclean spirit there's some surprise here because the dwelling, the house, was not in the same shape it was in when he left. Do you think do you think the unclean spirit tidied up? Do you think the unclean spirit swept and put things in order when he left? No. No. What we're talking about in the context, we are not far removed. A little bit earlier in the chapter, it talks about the Lord healing a demon possessed man. This is, as you think about it, this is what the Lord does. So, the unclean spirit, and we might also ask, and this perhaps reads a little bit too much into the account, but we'll simply say this. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, do you think the unclean spirits, do you think they usually left? Did they leave where they were voluntarily? Not usually. So we think about the demon, and we think about the Lord and the Lord's power. But also we might think about, and we'll come back to that point, we might also think about misery loves company. And it's odd to think about it. We're familiar with this account, or at least you might be familiar with this account. He goes, I want you to look at that verse 44. He says, I will return to my house from which I came, and when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. He finds the house in that situation. Verse 45, then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits. Okay, so he comes and he finds it. He finds it in a way he was not expecting to find it. And then he goes again and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself. It is a strange thing to put it this way, but he was willing to share. And the reason he was willing to share is because sinners love to have fellowship with other sinners. Misery loves company. You might consider that idea. It's strange to think about. And this I think this is the reason that sin snowballs, that misery snowballs, and things like this, that wickedness snowballs. As you think about the unclean spirit bringing others. Misery loves company. And misery loves, as you think about it, wickedness is quantifiable. And what I mean by that is that's also something that you can see in this passage when it says he takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself. More wicked than himself. So that means that wickedness is quantifiable. And that's when we start thinking about that, it's somewhat of a sobering thought. Now, to think about the passage and to think about what the Lord is talking about in the context, and there are applications. And one of the most common applications that is made, and I think it's a good application, is that it's not enough to just turn away from sin. It's not enough to just turn away from sin. We actually have to turn to the Lord. It's not enough to just cleanse the dish. You then have to fill it with righteousness. There's a saying that goes, nature abhors a vacuum. And what that's going towards, the idea of nature abhorring a vacuum, nature hates for things to be empty. That's why when as you think about it, just for an example, as you think about it, if you clear off a garden path, right? If you till it, if you get all the weeds out of it, you get all the grass out of it, you get everything you don't want out of it, and then you just leave it. If you come back in a few weeks, in a few months, what will you find? It will be taken over by something else. Nature abhors a vacuum. The house was empty, swept, put in order. Nobody was living there. It was empty. Nature abhors a vacuum. The unclean spirit finds it and he realizes, hey, there's room for my buddies who are worse than me. And it's not empty very much longer. So one of the applications is it's not enough to just turn away from sin. You actually have to turn to the Lord. It's not enough to just not do things. You have to do things. It's not enough to just empty. It's not enough to just be empty of sin. You have to be filled with righteousness. That's one of the applications. In the context, however, we might think about what the Lord is dealing with and where we are. You might look a little bit earlier when some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. He answered and said, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. No sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up in the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. Indeed, a greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise up in the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and indeed a greater than Solomon is here. And then we have our passage. I think what the Lord is talking about in the context, he's talking about the condition of that generation. And the end is going to be worse than the beginning, because they are not recognizing him as the Messiah. They are not obeying the Messiah. He is doing so many wonderful works. He is casting out demons. He is healing the sick. He's doing all these things. But let me simply ask you this question. As you think about this parable, this analogy that talks about the unclean spirit, which one is worse? Is it worse, as you think about the demons and you think about the unclean spirits, which is worse? Is it worse to be taken over by the devil involuntarily, right? Or is it worse to leave the door wide open and to basically invite the devil in voluntarily? Which one is worse? The Lord is doing so much good as he's casting out demons and as the devil is going to be bound and things like that. But just because he's casting out demons and just because the devil is bound, that in no way means that wickedness is going to decrease. It's actually going to increase. And it's going to increase voluntarily as the Messiah is ultimately rejected and crucified. And even in light of that, people are still, the scribes, the Pharisees, so many of them are still not going to turn from their sins. It is going to be the equivalent of the empty house that is swept, that is put in order. Just as I think about it, and pardon me for going on a little bit, think about the temple. What did Jesus do with the temple more than once? And the last time he does it is right before he goes to the cross. It's within that last week, if I remember correctly. He cleanses the temple. He cleanses the temple. Now, when he cleanses the temple, and when he talks about your house has left you desolate, do you think it's going to remain empty? No. My point is, they are going to voluntarily, frankly, be doing the devil's bidding. And that's more what this account is about. There's applications we can make to today, but he's condemning that generation. To go back and read that last verse one more time. He goes, takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. The end would be worse than the beginning. Anyway, somewhat of a sad account as you think about what was happening at that time, but there are certainly lessons that we can learn from it. I hope you have a good day today. Appreciate you tuning in for this brief study. I hope you're able to tune in tomorrow as well. Appreciate you being with us this morning.